Okay, so Chapter 8 is all about looking at Australia and their relationships and their interactions and financial transactions with the world economy. So the first thing we're going to look at in this chapter is what we call the balance of payments. And basically within the balance of payments we record all transactions of a financial nature between Australia and the rest of the world. So what that means is that would include all exports and imports of goods and services, so financial transactions where we either pay for imports or receive exports, transferring money from foreign migrants, which we'll talk about, any labour, so profits and wages associated with labour, interest on foreign debt gets included in the balance of payments, dividends, rent, sale and purchase of equity. All of these things will have a place within what we call the balance of payments. They'll either belong in the current account or they'll belong in the capital and financial account. So what we're going to look at in this video is what's meant by the balance of payments and the different components of the current account. So the balance of payments, again, you need a clear definition of this. It's an annual statistical record of the money value of all transactions, both current and capital and financial, between Australia and the rest of the world. So it records all transactions of a financial value, so it's any form of money, that are both a current transactions, and I put in brackets, without a future obligation, and capital and financial transactions, e.g. transactions with a financial obligation between Australia and the rest of the world. It has two accounts, the current account, which we'll talk about in this video, and the capital and financial account, which we'll talk about more throughout the rest of this week. So the balance of payments, it's called a balance of payments because it's always in balance. So whenever we have a deficit in one account, the current account for example, we have a surplus in the capital and financial account. Any deficit in the current account will be met with a surplus in the capital and financial account. If there's a current account surplus, which some countries do have, that will be offset by a capital and financial account deficit. So, as we said here, one's in deficit, the other one is in surplus by the same amount. There is a zero balance for the balance of payments overall. That doesn't mean that these accounts are always in balance. It means that the current account can be in deficit and the capital and financial account can be in surplus or deficit, but the combined amount of both of them will be in balance or have a zero figure. So when we're looking at the current and the capital and financial account, you need to use the words credits and debits. Credits are money coming into Australia from people overseas, and debits is when Australia makes the payments abroad. So regardless of whether it's a current or financial transaction, think about who's receiving the money. If it's Australia receiving the money, it's a credit. If it's foreign entities receiving the money, it's a debit. So for example, if I buy shares in Facebook, that would be an example of a debit because Facebook would receive the money. When I get the dividends on those shares, that would be a credit because they're giving me the money back. The current account records all transactions with the rest of the world with no future obligation. So a deficit in the current account means that we're paying more to foreigners, there's more debits than we're receiving in credits, and basically it means that in a given year, so the current account records debits and credits in a given year or quarter, we are spending more than we are earning. Our gross national expenditure exceeds GDP and we're going to have to borrow. So there are four sections of the current account: net goods, which is also called balance of merchandise trade, net services, and again together they represent the balance of trade or the balance on goods and services. Then there's net income and net current transfers. We now refer to that as net secondary income, so you won't hear that word net current transfers anymore. It's now called net secondary income. And together those four sub-accounts can either have a surplus or deficit individually, which together they represent a deficit or surplus. Australia always runs a current account deficit because debits exceed credits. Mainly in this account, the net income account, that's where we pay our interest on our debt. So there are four subsections. The first one is the balance of merchandise trade. This seems like it's fairly straightforward, but make sure you're using the right terminology. It's the value of exports of goods minus the value of imports of goods. So value, the price times the quantity, it's always a dollar figure. So if we export $20 billion worth of goods and import $22 billion, we would have a balance of trade deficit of $2 billion. So the credits can include wool, minerals, manufactured items, etc. Debits are things like oil, electronic equipment, things that Australia import from overseas. Net services is the importing and exporting of services, so the total value of money coming out of Australia for things like going overseas on holidays. It includes Australians travelling overseas, it includes Australians getting education overseas. Transportation, so if we're paying transportation costs to move some of our commodities or something like that, and we have to pay someone to ship the money from overseas, that would be an import. So if Australia is paying for transportation services, it's a service and it's a debit. Royalties, so if Australians use foreign music or take advantage of, and yes, so for example, if someone was to dress up as a character and it's from another country and get money from that, they would have to pay royalties back to that country. Insurance services, banking, again, royalties, don't know why that's there twice, must be important. License fees, so again, that can be used, for example, if you're doing a play or a musical, you might have to buy a license to show that play. So if we wanted to show Greece, for example, or I don't know, Joseph or any sort of foreign play or musical, then we would have to, that would be a debit. Credits, education for foreigners coming here, tourism, transportation, if they're paying for us to transport things, banking, insurance, construction services, royalties, and license fees. All the same as debits, but Australians are receiving the money. The value of the BOMT, the first account plus the second account net services, represents the balance of trade or the balance on goods and services. This is a dollar figure, and in Australia it's generally negative, but it can be positive. The third account is net primary income. This is the trickiest one. Basically, this includes, if you can remember the acronym WIDP, it records wages, interest, dividends, and profits. So there's four things: wages, interest, dividends, profits. And that goes both ways. It also includes rent, so I don't know what the acronym would be then, but wages, interest, dividends, profit, and rent, all related to past transactions, particularly profit. So if foreign companies brought Australian companies, the profits flowing in Australia would flow back overseas. Dividends on past transactions and shareholdings. So if I buy shares in Facebook, a credit would be me receiving my dividends on my shares, even though the initial transaction was a debit. And then debits would be payment for foreign labour, so workers working in Australia, interest on foreign debt, rent paid to foreigners, dividends paid to foreigners if they buy Australian shares, so if they invest in Qantas or BHP or something like that, and profits earned by foreign companies in Australia would also flow back overseas and be a debit. The main reason this account is in deficit is because of the large amount of interest Australia pays on its net foreign debt, which is a big debit, around $20 billion a year in this net primary income account. Net secondary income are transfer payments between Australia and another country. They're one-way payments, there's nothing exchanged. And what I mean by that is it's either us giving money to foreign countries in the form of foreign aid. It can also include pension payments, as well as gifts to other people overseas, and credits would be Australians receiving foreign aid. So if we had a natural disaster or some reason that we received foreign aid, if we received gifts from other countries, so you might receive a gift from a nana or something like that, and foreign pensions that Australians receive. They're different because they're one-way transactions and nothing is exchanged. Thank you.